Hi all, this is Maria Clark at Sweet Willow Designs and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to work on this 12 by 12 canvas I'm calling Color Burst, a little offset design here that you can orient or change it around any way you want to get a different look. Let's go ahead and get started. For the tools and materials we'll use in this project, I have all of the colors of paint that I'll be using, and those are linked in the description below, or noted in the description below. And then I'm using my usual Susan Bates crochet hook. I've also added a 5/8 inch dowel, wooden dowel, and a 3mm drill bit. And those things, are optional. If you don't have them, kind of look around your house and see if you have something that might work as a dotting tool, or just adapt one of the ones that you have. I've also got a canvas here that I've painted with a couple of coats of black chalk paint, and then I've put my grid marks. I've got 16 segments and put some circles. One thing that I think is important is I put the outside circle about a 1/2 inch in from the edge of the canvas, so I would really have a good stop point. I would know how far I wanted to go so that I didn't go too close or over the edge. And then I painted in the circle in the center. It's 1 7/8 inch, and I've done that in Peacock Teal. I wanted to show you that you can reuse canvases. Like, I kind of messed up here when I started this canvas, and you can kind of see the shadow of those dots. And all I did to prep my canvas is to sand it lightly. I took off sort of the centerpiece, sanded it lightly, and then repainted over it with the chalk paint, the background paint, and then I'm able to reuse that canvas. And you'll see that as I go, I actually will just cover it up. To paint the circle, the center dot, I just used a small flat brush and the Peacock Teal and just painted that in. I did have to use a couple of coats. For my first row, I'm going to be using the G6 4mm, and I'm using a Calypso, a color called Calypso Blue. I think it might be kind of hard to read on your monitor, but it's another shade of blue, and you'll notice in this piece I use a variety of shades of similar colors. And then I'm using one of my small nail dotters to walk dots in titanium white around that those first row of dots. And I'm going in still with my G6 4mm, and I'm adding dots in bright blue. And I will go ahead and walk dots around those, again using the smallest nail dotter. I think the thing to do is to just use a nail dotter that is a good size for the spacing that you have. I can't tell you usually exactly which nail dotter to use, so you just have to practice a little bit with it. But for most of this piece, I use the smaller nail dotter. Okay, going in, still using the G6 4mm, and I'm placing a row of purple Pizzazz, and I'll go ahead and walk the dots. This is really a pattern that we're going to use through most of this piece. One thing I wanted to share with you is I'm putting in sort of the floral element. I think these these look like little flowers to me. The floral element first, and then I'll go back in and put my rows of single dots. For this next row, I'm going to be mixing some of the purple and the fuchsia to get a sort of a mid-tone, a transition tone, and I will be using my H8 5mm to put those dots in. And that just gives me a nice transition color. And then, like all the rows, I'm going to go ahead and walk the dots. I'm using my I9 5.5mm and Royal Fuchsia to put my next row down, and you can see that the colors they are very slight in color shift, and that's just to give sort of a gradiated look. And we'll go ahead and get that row down and walk the dots. If you're following along in the digital pattern, you'll notice that I have a white background, so it's easier to see, and I use black for walking the dots instead of the titanium white, but it's really just so that you can see it more easily. I'm using my J10 6mm crochet hook and Bubblegum pink, and we'll get that row down. It's hard to see that that's a pink, it's a light shade, really pretty shade of pink. And you can see that I've pretty much covered up what I had to sand off to reuse this canvas. And we will walk those dots. This is going to make a nice fan sort of shape on the one edge, one side of the canvas. Okay, now I am using Royal Fuchsia and my K 10.5, 6.5 millimeter hook. We'll get a row of those on. Okay, I'm back to using the mix, and I'm using my L8 8 millimeter. Okay, I'm using purple Pizzazz now, and sticking with the L8, the L11 8 millimeter, and getting those dots down. Moved up to my M13 9 millimeter, and I'm using bright blue. Now I'm starting to repeat some of the early colors that I used. If you're following along with the digital pattern, you'll notice in the video a little bit later, I show you that I actually felt like I didn't have enough on this row, enough dots on this row. I think I'm showing 8 here, and I ultimately ended up putting 10 as I actually finalized the pattern. So pay attention to that when you're going through the digital pattern, but it's correct as the final piece is in the digital pattern. On this next row, I'm using, sticking with the M13 9 millimeter, and I'm using Calypso blue. Okay, I used my P16 11.5 millimeter and Peacock Teal for the next row, and then walk the dots. Sometimes I have to do a little correction, as you will. I use a Q-tip sometimes if I can get the paint off quickly enough, but when there's so much wet paint, you'll notice I just use the end of one of my nail dotters to go back in and kind of paint over the bad dot, and then I can go back in and redo it. So I'm still with my P16 11.5, and I've moved into Calypso blue. And I'll get that row down and walk the dots. I really think this is a pretty design with the offset look. A little color, I'm calling it color burst. It's a little explosion of color, kind of offset. Now I've moved into the 5/8 dowel of bright blue. Now, if you don't have one of these dowels, you can look around and see if you have a tool that might be a good similar size. I happen to have a set of wooden dowels that my son made for me, and they're pretty easy to find in the craft stores, a variety of sizes, and you can just use the end of that. Or if you have, sometimes you can find a little lipstick case that's the right size, and that would make a nice dotting tool. Or you can just stick with the largest size in your set, your crochet hook set, and that would work perfectly fine. I just wanted to move up a little bit in size here. And we'll get all those dots all the way around. Okay. Now I'm still using my 5/8 inch dowel, and I'm using purple Pizzazz. And this will be my last row of this fan shape. Isn't that pretty? I like the way the colors repeat and kind of, have a little bit of gradation to them. And we'll do the same as we have on all these other rows and walk the dots. Now, one thing I wanted you to notice here, when I looked at this, I didn't think, I thought I had some like blank spaces, so I'm filling it in. And this is sometimes what you have to do when you're dotting. You just have to make some decisions to go back in and either add, some additional elements because it doesn't look balanced to you, or you have a blank space. So I'm just filling it in, and the digital pattern shows the final correction. So you don't have to worry about having to adjust anything. But sometimes when you're on the fly dotting, you do need to make a change. So you can see that I've just drawn out that couple of the last rows to fill in some spots where I just didn't think it looked completely balanced. And on this last row, I have a little change to how I dotted the last row. I'm using the G6 4mm to put 3 sort of crown dots there in the larger size. I always dot the center one first and then move into the one on either side so I can get it sort of oriented, that first dot oriented correctly. It really helped me to have that one circle close to the edge so I would know where to stop and I didn't have to worry about going over. Sometimes when I'm just dotting without guidelines, I tend to come either too close or over the edge, and I didn't want to do that with this one, so I wanted to put myself a little guidepost there. So I've got those 3 dots, those 3 larger dots, and then I'm just using my largest nail dotter to walk the rest of those dots around. This is a pretty simple pattern in that it repeats often. Now, this is, again, I'm looking at it, I like the fan look, but I still think I have at least 1 or more gaps. See that? I think that's a blank spot that I don't really want to have. So I'm going to go back in and add a couple of dots there just to balance that piece out and not have a gap like that. So I just used the same hook that I had used for that row. And just add those in and walk the dots around, and then wherever else I think I need to add another dot, I will do that. And I felt like I needed to add a couple more there, and just use the color of that row and walk the dots around. Okay, so here's the piece, and it's got a nice beautiful sort of fan shape. I really like that. Now we're going to go around the top and add those single dots around starting around the center and then building outward. So I'm using my largest ball stylus to put a couple of rows here of the Calypso blue. So the center dot is the Peacock teal, and then I'm using Calypso blue, and just putting a couple of rows of those dots. We'll start out kind of small, and then we'll build the dots out, build them, make them larger as we move out. So still using the nail dotter, I'm using the bright blue. In these last couple of rows, I'm actually using a drill bit, and it's a 3mm. I just happen to have that in my kit. You don't have to worry about that. You can either use a drill bit if you've got one, or just keep using your largest nail dotter and just kind of dot it a couple of times, and you'll drop a little extra paint, and that'll make it a little larger if you even need to do that. So now I'm moving into still using the drill bit. I'm adding purple pizzazz for a couple of rows. And now using my G6 4mm, I will add a row of the Royal Fuchsia and Purple Pizzazz mix. And staying with the G6 4mm, I will add a row of the Royal Fuchsia. G6 4mm, I'll add a row of the Bubblegum pink. One thing I do want you to notice is at the end of each row, as I move up to the kind of fan shape, I am using a smaller dotting tool to fill in the space if I need to. And now using my G6 4mm, I'm adding a row of Royal Fuchsia. And then going in with the G6 4mm with a row of the Royal Fuchsia and Purple Pizzazz mix. Moving up to the H8 5mm, a row of Purple Pizzazz. And then sticking with the H8 5mm, a row of bright blue. I've moved to the I9 5.5mm for a row of Calypso blue, and the I9 5.5mm for a row of Peacock teal. Moving up to the J10 6mm, a row of Calypso blue. And then the K10.5 6.5mm for a row of bright blue. And then I'm using the L11 8mm for a row of Purple Pizzazz. And sticking with the L11 8mm, a row of the Royal Fuchsia and Purple mix. Using the M13 9mm, a row of Bubblegum pink. And then again with the M13 9mm, a row of the Royal Fuchsia and Purple Pizzazz mix. And my last row, I'll use the M13 9mm for a row of Purple Pizzazz. So to put this row, this kind of accent, couple of accent rows, I'm using Festive Green, and I'm using the largest nail daughter, but you would use whatever nail daughter fits in between. See, I'm just moving, I'm fitting them in between the dots on that last row to fill that in. And then I'm going in above the purple dots and using my G6 and a small nail daughter to add that last element with the primary dot and then 3 dots above it. And we'll do that all the way around that edge. And now I'm going in between and adding, using my G6 4mm, adding a row of couple of dots on either side of that one green row, using the G6 4mm and a small nail daughter to add a few little accents and this is in the Royal Fuchsia. So I've gone all the way, taken those last couple of rows all the way around, and I finished my piece. So here's how the piece looks. And what I like about this particular design is you can orient it in any way. If you like the way the fan is facing up or to the right or to the left or down. The down is the actual way I originally designed it. I think you can use any number of those options, and I think you'll really enjoy displaying this design. It looks great. So that completes this particular project. I hope you've enjoyed it. I so much appreciate you joining me in my studio. As always, thanks for joining me, and consider leaving me a comment if you have any questions. Leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, and I really appreciate it if you subscribe. Thanks so much for joining me in my studio. Take care.